What did Jerusalem look like in Jesus' day, 2,000 years ago? Think how the Bible would spring to life if we could walk through the Jerusalem that Jesus knew. Thankfully, we can. Archaeologists and historians have built a scale model of first century Jerusalem, 1/50th the real size. This shows us the Jerusalem that Herod built, the Jerusalem that Jesus knew, the Jerusalem destroyed by the Roman army in 70 AD. Jerusalem was located on the crest of the Judean hills 2,500 feet above sea level. Herod the Great had done vast building work all over the city, but the temple on Mount Moriah was its glory. On the opposite side of the city, to the west, Herod had built a magnificent palace. It had two main buildings, and each one had banquet halls and baths and bedrooms for hundreds of guests. There was a large courtyard between the two buildings with groves of trees and fountains and bronze sculptors pouring water into the fountains. The palace was protected by walls and towers on every side, including the east side where it faced the city. At the north end of the palace, there were three great towers to guard the palace and the city. The largest was the Tower of Phasael, named for Herod's brother. It was 148 feet tall. The bottom part of the tower was solid stonework, and this is still standing today. The top part was a small palace, an ancient penthouse. The second tower was named Hippicus for a friend of Herod. It also had rooms on the top and was 132 feet tall. The third tower, 75 feet tall, was named for Herod's favorite wife, Mariamne. Herod loved her madly, but when she was accused of unfaithfulness, he had her put to death, and then almost went mad because of what he had done. The rooms in this tower were more luxurious than the other two, as befitted a queen. There was an army barracks between the three towers and the palace. When the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, some of the heaviest fighting was around the three towers. Herod was right in thinking that any attack on Jerusalem would probably come from the north. Just east of the palace, there was a large open area surrounded by shops and colonnades. This was called the Upper Market. The area around the market was the Upper City. This is the part of Jerusalem where the homes of the wealthy were located. A deep valley separated the Upper City from the Temple Mount. The largest palace in the Upper City belonged to the Maccabees, the Jewish royal family who had ruled the Jews for 100 years before the Romans took over. This palace had two towers and a courtyard, along with the living quarters and the baths. The Upper City also had a theater that Herod had built, another evidence of his love for the culture of Greece and Rome. When Herod began making plans to rebuild the temple, he found that Mount Moriah was not big enough for the temple that he wanted to build. So Herod built an enormous retaining wall around the Temple Mount and filled it in with earth and rocks, and this became the platform for the site of his temple. At the southeast corner of the Temple Mount, this great retaining wall was 211 feet high, and it came to be called the pinnacle of the temple. One of Jesus' temptations, cast yourself down, may have taken place here. At the south wall, there was a great flight of steps leading up to the wall with its two gates, the Huldah gates. The tomb of the prophetess Huldah was in front of these steps. From the gates, there were steps through large tunnels leading up to the temple. On the west side, the Tyropoeon Valley, also called the Cheesemaker's Valley, separated the Temple Mount from the Upper City. There was a bridge across this valley from the Upper City to the temple. At the southwest corner of the Temple Mount, a wide stairway went down from the temple to a street in the valley below. The summit of Mount Moriah was a large open court called the Court of the Gentiles, 1,300 feet long and 700 feet wide. It had colonnaded porticos on all four sides. The royal portico on the south side was twice as large as the others. As we look through its columns, we can visualize the stalls with the sacrificial animals for sale, the money changers, and the rabbis teaching their students. Solomon's portico, where Jesus often met with his disciples, was on the east side. There was a large wall called the balustrade that separated the temple proper from the court of the Gentiles. The balustrade had 13 gates, and each one had a sign warning Gentiles that they could not go into the temple on pain of death. And archaeologists have actually found one of those warning signs. The first court of the temple was the court of the women, and as the name suggests, Jewish women were allowed in this court. One corner of this court was set aside for people making Nazirite vows, and another for the purification of lepers. The Nicanor gate led from the court of the women into the court of the Israelites, where Jewish men could go. This beautiful gate was made of copper. It was approached by 15 curved steps where the Levites sang and played. The temple itself was as tall as a 15-story building. It was made out of 3 kinds of marble. The 2 columns on the front, patterned after Solomon's temple, were of reddish marble. The sides of the temple were of white marble, the foundation blue. The huge door was 66 feet high. It was decorated with gold around the top. According to Josephus, the temple looked like a snowy mountain glittering in the sunshine. Herod built a large fortress on the northwest corner of the Temple Mountain and named it Antonio in honor of Mark Antony. From the towers at Herod's palace, we can see the fortress in the distance. The fortress had towers over 100 feet tall at the 4 corners, with large gates on the east and west, and another gate going down into the court of the Gentiles. Inside the fortress there were 2 large courtyards paved with stone, with cloisters and barracks surrounding the courtyards. When a mob tried to kill Paul in Acts 21, he was rescued by the Roman soldiers and taken into this fortress. And Jesus may have been condemned to death here. The pool of Bethesda was just north of the fortress, with the sheep market near the pool. Just south of the Temple Mountain, Herod had built a Roman-style hippodrome or stadium. It was used for chariot races in spite of the Jews' hostility to this sport. The floor of the stadium had a wall and turning posts, and the chariots raced around these. The seating was about like a modern football stadium. Just below the hippodrome there was a row of palaces along the city wall. And below the palaces, the synagogue of the freedmen, where Stephen preached and became the first Christian martyr. The pool of Siloam was near the synagogue. This is where the Hezekiah Tunnel brought water from the Gihon Spring into the city, and it's where Jesus healed the blind man in John 9. Above the pool, the lower city is where many of the poor people lived. Golgotha, the place of execution, was outside the city on the west, not far from Herod's 3 towers. If Pilate condemned Jesus to death in the Fortress Antonio, as many believe, it was only a few hundred yards straight west of the rocky hill where he died. The Jerusalem that Jesus knew came to an end in 70 A.D., destroyed and burned by the Roman army under Titus. But even so, archaeologists have identified many sites from Jesus' day. The Romans destroyed the temple completely, but not the large retaining wall around the Temple Mountain. The western wall is still standing, and the massive Herodian stones are still in place. This is the Jews' holiest shrine, and they come here for prayer. The young Orthodox come. The old men come. Soldiers come to pray at the wall. On special days like Pentecost and Jerusalem Day, thousands come to the wall for their morning prayers, wearing prayer shawls and phylacteries. They come before dawn, and the prayers go on for many hours. Jewish women have their own section of the wall, and they're not allowed at the men's section. Judge Adler tells us about the phylacteries and about a discovery at Masada.
These The Jew prays 3 times a day. When he prays in the morning, he wears these phylacteries, which in Hebrew are called tefillin. One on the arm and one on the head. The one on the arm is between is pointed at the heart, from the biblical injunction to keep God all the time in your heart. And the one on the head is right between your eyes, from the injunction to keep God in your mind all the time. And they're put on with straps around the arm. If you go to the museum in Jerusalem, you'll see that at Masada they found phylacteries, which are the same type and have the same biblical script inside the little boxes. The script about "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." And these were found inside the tefillin at Masada. You can see them in the museum.
At the south end of the western wall in Jesus' day, there was a wide stairway that led down into the valley. Archaeologists have found the place where that stairway was anchored to the ancient wall. And these are the foundations where the stairway came down to the valley. Remains of the ancient Herodian street through the valley can still be seen. The south wall in Jesus' day had a broad flight of steps leading up to the Huldah gates. This wall has been excavated by Benjamin Mazar over the last 10 years. Notice the beautiful condition of these stones. The margin around each stone is hardly worn. The reason for this is that these stones have been buried ever since the year 70 A.D. Look at the size of this enormous stone, 6 feet high and 27 feet long. It weighs over 200 tons, and there are other Herodian stones in the wall that are twice this size. Today we can walk down the broad steps at the south wall. Some of these are the original steps, and Jesus might have walked into the temple on these very steps. The southwest corner of the Temple Mount was called the place of trumpeting in Jesus' day. We know from Josephus that a priest stood here and sounded a trumpet across the upper city to announce the beginning of the Sabbath. Archaeologists recently dug up a stone 3 feet wide here at this corner. It has an inscription, and the inscription reads, "The place of trumpeting." When the temple was destroyed in 70 A.D., this stone fell from the corner high above and has been buried here ever since. The Facile Tower stood at the north end of Herod the Great's palace. The base of that tower, 30 feet high, is still standing in the citadel. The Pool of Siloam provided a water supply for Herodian Jerusalem. And today, we can still wade through Hezekiah's tunnel, and we come out of the tunnel at the Pool of Siloam. This beautiful view of Jerusalem is from Mount Scopus, and according to Josephus, Vespasian planned his siege of the city from here on Mount Scopus. The siege finally came to an end with the city destroyed under Titus in August of 70 A.D. Archaeologists have recently found a house destroyed at that time, and this is the first archaeological evidence of Jerusalem's fall. The house belonged to an important priestly family named Cathros. The archaeologists found vivid evidence of the destruction, broken pottery and furniture, and the charred wooden beams that fell from the ceiling. They even found the skeleton of a young woman that was killed by the Romans on that awful day. The wealthy families of Jerusalem lived in the upper city around the Maccabean palace in Jesus' day. Archaeologists working in this area have recently found a large Herodian villa destroyed in 70 A.D. This villa is so large and luxurious that the archaeologists think that it might have been the home of Ananias, the high priest at the time Jerusalem was destroyed. The villa was opened to the public as a museum in 1989. The basement area of the villa is well preserved with a water system, ritual baths, and several floors that are covered with mosaics. The villa has beautiful plastered walls. One of the walls was decorated to look like Herodian stones, with the margin cut around each stone. First-century furniture was found, including this pedestal table and this Roman glass bowl. A long wooden beam had fallen across a mosaic floor and burned, and archaeologists have left the charred wood and the ashes in place. grim evidence of the terrible destruction that came to Jerusalem in August of 70 AD. There are many monuments in the Kidron Valley that were here in Jesus' day. This one is Absalom's Pillar, a monument to Absalom, the son of David. It's more than 2,000 years old, and as Jesus walked up and down this Kidron Valley, he would have passed this monument many times. Thanks to the many discoveries of archaeology, the Jerusalem of today melts into the Jerusalem of the past, where Abraham met Melchizedek, where Solomon built God's temple, and where Jesus preached and died. Thanks to archaeology, there is no spot on earth where the Bible is more real than in Jerusalem.